The sound of shattering porcelain cut through the pre-dawn silence like a scream. Yoon Tae-jin stood frozen in the doorway of his $14 million Hanamdong penthouse, his Armani tie hanging loose around his neck, watching his 7-year-old son, Min-jun, methodically grind the fragments of what had once been a family portrait into the imported Italian marble. Blood dripped from the boy's knuckles, but his face remained blank, empty, as if he'd severed every nerve that connected his body to his heart. Behind him, 6-year-old Hyun-woo crouched beneath the dining table like a wounded animal, while 5-year-old Se-jun screamed, not words, just raw sound, his small fists pounding against the floor in a rhythm that matched Tae-jin's racing pulse. And Jae-won, the second eldest, stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Han River, carefully, deliberately, tearing pages from the last photo album that contained pictures of their mother. "Not again," Tae-jin whispered, but the words dissolved into the chaos, meaningless as smoke. Min-jun's head snapped up. His eyes, so much like his father's, held nothing but contempt. "We don't need another one. They all leave anyway." Tae-jin's phone buzzed in his pocket. He didn't need to look to know it was the school, again, or perhaps the agency, again, or maybe his father, the chairman of Celestial Group, calling to remind him that broken men don't build hotel empires, that shattered families don't sit on boards of directors, that he was becoming, in his father's precise words, a liability. This was his life now, had been for 3 years, ever since Park Sun-hee, his wife, their mother, had boarded a flight to Switzerland for treatment and simply never come home. No divorce papers, no phone calls, just absence, clean and total, as if she'd decided that erasing herself was easier than facing what motherhood had done to her. The boys were 4, 4, 3, and 2. Old enough to remember her smile, young enough to believe they'd caused it to disappear. 26 caregivers in 8 months. The number flashed in Tae-jin's mind like a neon sign advertising his failure. 26 women with impeccable credentials and unshakable confidence, all of whom had walked through his door believing they could fix what was broken here. 26 women who'd left, some after days, some after mere hours, with trembling hands and shell-shocked expressions, as if they'd survived a natural disaster rather than employment in a luxury penthouse. The last one, Miss Chen, a stern Mandarin-speaking nanny with a PhD in child psychology, had quit at 6 o'clock that morning. Tae-jin had watched from this same doorway as she speed-walked toward the elevator, her suitcase wheels squeaking against the hallway's marble floor, moving like a woman fleeing a burning building. She'd refused her final paycheck, actually refused money. "Keep it," she'd said in Mandarin, her voice shaking. "Those children need an exorcist, not a nanny." Now, as dawnlight spilled across his devastated living room, Tae-jin understood that he was witnessing something far worse than childish misbehavior. This was grief weaponized. This was abandonment calcified into rage. This was 4 small boys who'd learned that everyone they loved eventually disappeared, so they decided to disappear first, to hollow themselves out until nothing remained but the violence of their pain. Min-jun had stopped grinding the porcelain. He was staring at his father now, waiting. They were always waiting, Tae-jin realized, waiting for him to give up too, waiting to prove that even blood wasn't enough to make someone stay. "Get ready for school," Tae-jin said quietly. His voice sounded like a stranger's, thin and defeated. "We're suspended," Jae-won announced without turning from the window. "Didn't you check your phone? They found us in the cafeteria. We set a fire in the trash can, a small one, but apparently that's not allowed." His tone was conversational, pleasant even, as if he were discussing the weather rather than arson. Tae-jin closed his eyes. The board meeting. He had a board meeting in 2 hours to present the Q3 expansion into African markets, Ghana, Nigeria, South Africa. His father would be there, the entire executive team. He was supposed to project confidence, vision, the unshakable authority of a man who'd built Celestial Group's hotel empire into a multinational giant. Instead, he was standing in his own home, surrounded by broken glass and broken children, feeling the full weight of his powerlessness. His phone buzzed again. This time, he looked. Chairman Yoon. "Fix your house, Tae-jin. You're becoming an embarrassment." Something cracked in his chest, small and quiet, like ice beginning to thaw. Before we continue, can I ask you a question? Where in the world are you watching from? Are you listening from Seoul, Lagos, New York, or somewhere else entirely? Drop your city in the comments because I'm genuinely curious who's following this story. And if you're new here, welcome to a channel where we tell stories that cut deep and heal deeper. Hit that like button and subscribe. Now, let's get back to what happened when Tae-jin's world collapsed. The board meeting was a massacre. Tae-jin stood before Seoul's most powerful executives in the Celestial Group headquarters in Gangnam, his presentation on the screen behind him showing projected revenues, market analyses, architectural renderings of luxury properties overlooking Accra's coastline and Lagos's vibrant skyline. He was 3 slides in when his assistant, a nervous young woman named Miss Park, entered the conference room and whispered something that made his blood run cold. The school called. All 4 boys. Fire. Police involvement possible. The room fell silent. Tae-jin watched his father's face harden, watched the other board members exchange glances that communicated everything without words. They'd all heard the rumors. The revolving door of Nannies, the destroyed classrooms, the concerning reports from teachers about children who seemed determined to self-destruct. Chairman Yoon closed the folder in front of him with deliberate slowness. "We'll revisit this expansion when you've addressed your domestic situation." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Disappointment, Tae-jin had learned, was always quieter than anger and infinitely more cutting. Tae-jin left the building without looking back, his carefully prepared presentation abandoned on the conference room screen like evidence of dreams he no longer had permission to pursue. The elite staffing agency in Apgujeong was his last hope, and he knew it. Mrs. Beck, the agency director, was a formidable woman in her 60s who'd built her reputation on placing caregivers in Seoul's most demanding households. She'd found nannies for chaebols, for ambassadors, for celebrities whose children required both discretion and expertise. But when Tae-jin walked into her office that afternoon, she looked at him with something uncomfortably close to pity. "Mr. Yoon," she said, gesturing for him to sit, "I'm terminating our contract." The words hung in the air between them. "Name your price," Tae-jin said. It was what he always said. Money was supposed to solve problems. That's what his father had taught him. That's what he'd believed his entire life. Mrs. Bake shook her head. "This isn't about money. Your home has developed a reputation. I have 27 caregivers on my roster. Not one of them will accept placement with your family. They've heard stories. Miss Chen told everyone at our last professional development seminar that working for you was like being deployed to a war zone." She paused, her expression softening slightly. "Mr. Yoon, I say this with respect. Your sons don't need staff. They need serious therapeutic intervention. They need trauma specialists. They need a mother," Tae-jin interrupted, his voice cracking. "They need someone who won't leave." Mrs. Bake said nothing. What could she say? That such people didn't exist? That his sons had already proven themselves experts at driving away anyone who tried? Tae-jin stood to leave, his movements mechanical, defeated. He was halfway to the door when the receptionist, a young woman he'd barely noticed on his way in, spoke up hesitantly. "Mrs. Bake, there's one person, but she's not a nanny. She's just a housekeeper. No credentials, no formal training. She was looking for placement last week, but we told her we only place certified professionals." Mrs. Bake frowned. "Minji, that's inappropriate. Mr. Yoon needs—" "Send her," Tae-jin said. He turned back, and something in his face must have conveyed his desperation, because both women fell silent. I don't care about credentials. I don't care about training. Send her." Mrs. Bake looked like she wanted to argue, but perhaps she saw what Tae-jin himself was only beginning to recognize, that he was a man with no options left, standing at the edge of a cliff, willing to grab at anything that might keep him from falling. "Her name is Adana Okafor," the receptionist said quietly. "She's Nigerian, speaks limited Korean. She was working as a nurse in Lagos before moving here 18 months ago. She's been doing housekeeping to make ends meet." "Why did she leave nursing?" Tae-jin asked. The receptionist hesitated. "Her file says personal loss. She didn't elaborate." Tae-jin nodded slowly. Personal loss, as if those two words could possibly contain the universe of pain they implied. "Send her tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. That night, Tae-jin sat alone in his home office, surrounded by the detritus of his attempts at fatherhood. Parenting books he'd never finished, contact information for therapists his sons had refused to see, a half-empty bottle of whiskey that had become less decoration and more necessity. From down the hall, he could hear Sejun screaming in his sleep, the same nightmare that came every night, always at 11:47, as reliable as a clock and just as mechanical. He could hear Minjun's footsteps pacing his bedroom, the boy unable or unwilling to rest. Hyunwoo had probably crawled under his bed by now, his preferred hiding spot, while Jaewon would be sitting at his window, watching the city lights, silent and unreachable. Tae-jin pulled out his phone and for the first time in 3 years allowed himself to look at photos of Sun-hee, his wife, the woman he'd failed to save. She'd been an actress when they met, luminous and fragile, with a smile that could light up a room and shadows in her eyes that he'd foolishly believed love could erase. They'd tried for years to have children, miscarriage after miscarriage, IVF attempts that drained their bank accounts and her hope. And then, miracle of miracles, 4 sons. 4 perfect, terrifying reasons to live. But Sun-hee had unraveled like a thread pulled too hard. Postpartum depression, the doctors had said, manageable with treatment, but it only got worse after each childbirth. But Sun-hee had looked at her 4 screaming children like they were strangers who'd invaded her body, and something in her had simply shut down. She'd tried, God, she'd tried, but trying isn't the same as succeeding. And by the time the first boy was 4, she'd become a ghost in her own home, present but absent, there but gone. The Switzerland story had been a fiction they'd both agreed to maintain. Treatment for exhaustion, a rest cure. They'd told the boys she'd be home soon, but Tae-jin had known, watching her board that plane, that she was never coming back. Some people break under pressure. Sun-hee had atomized, dispersed like mist, leaving nothing behind but the 4 small humans who believed they'd driven her away. And maybe they had. Maybe Tae-jin had too. Maybe they were all guilty of needing too much from someone who had nothing left to give. His phone showed 47 missed calls. School, staff, family. The digital evidence of a life spiraling out of control. Tomorrow, a woman named Adana Okafor would arrive. A housekeeper. Not a professional, not a solution, just another person who would look at his sons and see problems to be managed, behaviors to be corrected, obstacles to be overcome. Just another person who would leave. But Tae-jin found himself praying anyway, to a God he wasn't sure he believed in anymore. Please, please let this one be different. Please let someone stay. In a tiny Gosiwon apartment in Itaewon, barely large enough to contain a bed and a single window overlooking Seoul's chaotic streets, Adana Okafor lit a candle. It was 5:30 in the morning, and the city was just beginning to wake around her. She'd been in Korea for 18 months, ever since the day she'd walked out of Lagos University Teaching Hospital and decided she couldn't look at another sick child, couldn't watch another parent's face crumble when she delivered news that shattered worlds. Not after Chisum. The candle flame flickered as she knelt, her hands clasped, her eyes fixed on the photograph taped to her wall. Chisum, 8 years old, bright as sunlight, quick as laughter, taken by leukemia so aggressive that even God seemed to look away. Adana had been an ICU nurse for 12 years. She'd fought death professionally, clinically, with every tool modern medicine provided. But when death came for her own daughter, all that expertise had meant nothing. She'd held Chisam's small hand and watched the light go out of her eyes. And something in Adana had gone out too. She'd come to Korea because staying in Nigeria meant drowning in memories. Every street corner held Chisam's ghost. Every playground echoed with her laughter. Seoul was supposed to be far enough away to breathe.
But grief, Adana had discovered, was portable. It followed her across continents, nestled in her chest like a second heart, beating its own painful rhythm. "Chuku," she whispered in Igbo, the language of her mother, her grandmother, her ancestors. "I don't know why you're sending me to this family, but I'm listening." The acceptance letter from the agency sat on her small table, a housekeeping position, not nursing. She'd told them she was done with medical work, done with watching people suffer. But when the receptionist had called last night with the details, 4 young boys, no mother, desperate father, something had shifted in Adana's chest. Not hope exactly, more like recognition, as if God himself had leaned down and whispered, "This is why I brought you here." She sang softly as she prepared for the day, an old Igbo worship song her grandmother had taught her. Ekele diri Chuku, Ekele diri Chuku, Iheoma ina emere anyi. Thanks be to God, thanks be to God, for all the good things you do for us. The melody was simple, repetitive, designed to be sung while working, while walking, while breathing through pain too large for words. On the subway to Hanam-dong, Adana moodised the stairs. She'd grown accustomed to them over 18 months, the barely concealed curiosity, sometimes hostility, that followed her dark skin through Seoul's predominantly homogeneous landscape. She wore her housekeeping uniform, a simple navy dress that marked her status as clearly as a sign: foreign, domestic worker, other. The hierarchy was visible, tangible, pressed into the very fabric of her clothes. But Adana had learned something during her years as a nurse, something her grief had only reinforced. Everyone bleeds the same color, rich or poor, Korean or Nigerian, powerful or powerless. Pain was the great equalizer, the universal language that required no translation.
The Yoon family's penthouse building rose above Hanam-dong like a glass monument to wealth. Adana stood in the lobby, suddenly aware of how small she felt, how presumptuous this entire endeavor seemed. What was she doing here? She was a housekeeper now, not a healer. She had no training in child care, no credentials, no reason to believe she could help where 26 others had failed. But she pressed the elevator button anyway, because sometimes faith means moving forward without certainty, trusting that the path will appear beneath your feet. The penthouse door was unlocked. Adana rang the bell once, twice, no answer, just the sound of something crashing inside, heavy and violent. She hesitated, her hand on the door handle, then pushed it open. What she saw stopped her breath. The living room looked like a hurricane had passed through, if hurricanes could be made of rage and grief. Furniture overturned, food smeared on walls in abstract patterns that might have been art if they weren't so clearly destruction. 3 boys clustered around what had once been photo albums, systematically tearing pages, their small hands working with methodical efficiency. And under the dining table, a 4th child, the smallest, screaming with such raw intensity that Adana felt it in her bones. This was the chaos 26 caregivers had fled. The oldest boy, Min Jun, she would learn later, looked up first. His eyes were old, far too old for 7, carrying knowledge no child should possess. He picked up a stuffed animal, a worn rabbit with one ear missing, and threw it at Adana's head with surprising force. It hit her temple, not hard enough to hurt, but hard enough to make his point. "Leave," he said in English, each word bitten off and spit out. "Now!" The second boy, Jae-won, straightened from his position by the windows. "You'll quit by tonight. They all do. It's usually around dinner time, but Miss Chen made it to breakfast, so maybe you'll last until lunch. Want to bet?" Hyun-woo said nothing, just watched from behind the overturned couch, his dark eyes tracking Adana's every movement like a prey animal assessing a predator. And Sejun, under the table, just kept screaming.
26 caregivers had looked at this scene and made a calculation. They'd weighed their professional pride against the impossibility of the task, their need for employment against their instinct for self-preservation, and they'd chosen to leave. It was rational. It was understandable. It was what any sane person would do. Adana set down her bag. She didn't speak, didn't approach the boys, didn't try to clean or control or fix anything. She simply stood there, in the center of chaos, and began to hum. Chuku Oma, Chuku Oma, Chuku Oma di Ebube. God is good, God is good, God is good and greatly to be praised. The melody rose soft and low, an Igbo worship song that asked for nothing, demanded nothing, just existed like breath. Minjun's arm was still raised, ready to throw another object, but he paused, confused. Adana moved to the broken glass scattered across the floor and began picking up pieces, still humming, her voice steady and unhurried. She didn't look at the boys, didn't challenge them, just worked, as if destruction was simply another form of housekeeping, something to be attended to with patience rather than panic. The screaming under the table had stopped. Adana could feel Seo-jun watching her now, his small body still trembling, but his voice gone quiet. She continued humming, continued cleaning, and slowly, like ice melting in spring, she felt the temperature of the room begin to shift, not warm yet, but less frozen, less hostile, less utterly convinced that every adult was an enemy. She found the kitchen and assessed its contents. Rice, vegetables, spices that hadn't been used in months, judging by the dust on the containers. In Nigeria, in her mother's house, food had been love made tangible. Every meal was an opportunity to nourish not just bodies, but souls. Adana began to cook, her hands moving through familiar motions, the rhythm of chopping and stirring as meditative as prayer. The stew she made was simple: tomatoes, peppers, onions, the foundation of 100 Nigerian dishes, but she adjusted it, added Korean gochugaru for heat, doyenjang for depth, creating something that belonged to both worlds and neither. Jollof rice with kimchi jjigae, a fusion born of necessity. She set the table, 4 plates, 4 cups. She didn't call the boys, didn't announce dinner, just returned to her humming, that same Igbo melody, and waited.
Min-jun appeared first, drawn by hunger or curiosity, or perhaps just the novelty of an adult who didn't seem to need anything from him. He stood in the kitchen doorway, wary as a stray dog. "It's ready, if you're hungry," Adana said softly in Korean, her accent thick but her meaning clear. "I'm not eating your food," Min-jun said, but his stomach betrayed him with a growl. "Okay," Adana replied. She didn't argue, didn't cajole, just began eating her own portion, the ritual of the meal continuing with or without him. Jae-won came next, then Hyun-woo emerging from his hiding spot, and finally Se-jun crawling out from under the table. They sat, suspicious and silent, staring at the food like it might be poisoned. But hunger, Adana knew, was a powerful motivator. Min-jun took the first bite, his expression carefully neutral, and then something shifted in his face. "It tastes like Mom's food used to," he said before he could stop himself. Then his face hardened again, walls slamming back into place. Before she left, before she decided they weren't worth staying for, before their world collapsed. The word hung in the air, heavy with everything it didn't say. That's when Yoon Tae-jin came home. He expected disaster. He'd spent the entire day bracing for the inevitable phone call from Mrs. Beck informing him that Ms. Okafor had quit within hours, possibly minutes. He'd prepared himself for another failure, another confirmation that his family was beyond saving. Instead, he found his 4 sons sitting at the dining table eating. Not fighting, not destroying, not screaming, just eating, like normal children in a normal family, as if the past 3 years had been a fever dream from which they'd all suddenly awakened. And in the kitchen, humming that strange, haunting melody, was a woman he'd never seen before. Tall, dark-skinned, moving through his space with the kind of calm competence that suggested she'd walked into chaos and simply decided it didn't have authority over her. "What did you do?" Tae-jin asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Did you drug them?" Adana turned, meeting his eyes for the first time. Hers were deep brown, almost black, and they held a quality he couldn't name. Not judgment exactly, more like recognition, as if she could see straight through his expensive suit and carefully maintained facade to the terrified, failing father underneath. "I cooked," she said simply. "They were hungry." "You weren't hired to cook, just keep them from killing each other." Something flickered across Adana's face, not anger, but something quieter and more dangerous. She dried her hands on a towel, her movements deliberate, and then said in her accented Korean, "Respectfully, Mr. Yoon, I wasn't hired to keep them alive. I was sent to help them live. There's a difference." The words hit Tae-jin like a physical blow. He opened his mouth to respond, to argue, to assert his authority as employer and father, but nothing came out, because she was right. He'd been so focused on survival, on preventing disasters, managing crises, containing damage, that he'd forgotten about living, about joy, about the possibility that his sons might be more than their trauma. From the dining room, he heard Se-jun's voice, small and uncertain. "Miss Adana, can we have more?" "Miss Adana?" Tae-jin repeated. She smiled then, just slightly. "They asked my name. I told them." It seemed like such a small thing, a name, but Tae-jin realized with a jolt that none of the previous caregivers had made it far enough to be called by name. They'd all been the nanny, or the lady, or nothing at all. Just another face in a parade of faces that meant nothing because they never stayed long enough to matter. If you've made it this far, I know you're invested in this story. Do me a favor and drop a comment telling me what you think Adana saw in these boys that 26 others missed. And if this story is hitting different, hit that like button because it helps more people find these narratives that matter. The testing began at 2 a.m. Adana woke to the sound of water, rhythmic, deliberate, the unmistakable splash of liquid hitting fabric. She sat up in the small room they'd designated as hers, turned on the light, and found her bed soaked through, the 4 boys standing in her doorway with empty cups and expressions that dared her to react. 26 caregivers had faced similar tests. Some had yelled, some had cried, some had simply packed their bags right then, refusing to stay another moment in a home where children wielded cruelty like weapons. Adana looked at her soaked mattress, looked at the boys. Then she quietly gathered her pillow and a blanket, spread them on the floor, and lay down without a word. She closed her eyes and began to pray in Igbo, her voice a low murmur that filled the room like incense. Chuku, me kahahuru naha abu undi irom, me kahamata na anorom ebea iji hapuruha. God, let them see they are not my enemies. Let them know I am not here to leave them. The boys stood in the doorway, confused. This wasn't the script. Adults were supposed to get angry. They were supposed to prove, through their anger, that the boys' worst beliefs about themselves were true, that they were too broken, too damaged, too difficult to love. Min Jun tried again the next day. He drew a picture with crayons, crude but effective, a dark-skinned figure with exaggerated features, and the words, "Ugly black lady who will leave," scrawled underneath in English. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she took it carefully and hung it on the refrigerator with a magnet. "Beautiful art, Jae-won," she said, getting the name wrong on purpose, her tone genuinely admiring. "I'm Min-jun," he corrected automatically, thrown off balance. "Oh, Min-jun, thank you for sharing your art with me. It's very honest."
The boy's face twisted with confusion and something that might have been shame. He'd expected anger, confrontation, proof that he could drive her away through cruelty. Instead, she'd reframed his weapon as a gift, his attack as expression, and he had no defense against that kind of radical acceptance. The escalation continued. They locked her out on the balcony during a rainstorm. She sat peacefully, letting the water soak her clothes, praying aloud in Igbo until Hyun-woo finally opened the door, his small face troubled. They hid her shoes. She walked barefoot through the penthouse, never complaining, never mentioning the missing items. And then Seo-jun, the smallest, the most wounded, stood inches from her face and screamed. That same raw, wordless sound that had driven away every adult who'd tried to help him. It was a test and a plea, violence and vulnerability twisted together until they were indistinguishable. Adana looked at him. Then she screamed back, not in anger, but in play, matching his volume. And then she laughed, a real laugh, surprised and genuine, as if she'd just discovered something delightful. Seo-jun stopped. For the first time in months, his voice went silent, not from exhaustion, but from shock. And then, miracle of miracles, his mouth twitched, almost a smile, not quite, but close enough that Adana felt tears prick her eyes. On the fifth morning, Tae-jin woke to singing, not humming this time, full voices, multiple voices, harmonizing in a language he didn't recognize. He grabbed his phone, thinking maybe he'd accidentally set an alarm with the wrong ringtone, but the sound was real, coming from his dining room. He found all four of his sons sitting at the table, hands folded, heads bowed, singing along with Adana as she taught them an Igbo blessing song. Chineke mezi okwu, Chineke mezi okwu, Chukwu na eme ebube. God make things right, God make things right, God who does marvelous things. Min-jun was actually singing, his voice small and uncertain, but present. Jae-won's eyes were wet, though no tears had fallen. Hyun-woo sat beside Seo-jun, holding his younger brother's hand, both of them swaying slightly to the rhythm. And Adana led them, her voice strong and clear, turning their dining room into something that felt uncomfortably like a church.
Tae-jin stood in the doorway with his phone raised, accidentally recording, watching a scene he'd believed impossible. His sons, at peace, together, participating in something that looked almost like family. "Good morning, Mr. Yoon," Adana said when the song ended. "We made breakfast. Would you like to join us?" He should have said no. He had meetings, emails, the expansion proposal to revise, his father to appease, a company to run, a reputation to salvage, all the important work of being Yoon Tae-jin, billionaire, CEO, man who controlled everything, except the things that actually mattered. But he sat down instead. The meal was simple: rice, eggs, kimchi, sliced fruit, nothing fancy. But as Tae-jin ate with his sons for the first time in 3 years, he tasted something he'd forgotten existed. Not just food, but communion. The simple, profound act of being together without agenda, without crisis, just present in the same moment, occupying the same space, breathing the same air. "Miss Adana," Jae-won said suddenly, his voice careful, "why did you come here?" "Because Chukwu told me you needed someone to stay," Adana replied. "Who's Chukwu?" Seo-jun asked. His voice was raspy from disuse, each word clearly difficult. But he was speaking, actually speaking. Chukwu is God. That's what we call him in my language, in Igbo. Everyone says God sent them, Minjun said, his tone hard. Then they leave anyway. Adana set down her fork. She reached for her wrist where a simple braided bracelet hung and touched it gently. I lost someone too. My daughter, her name was Chisom. She was 8 years old. She died 18 months ago. The silence that followed was different from the angry silences Tae-jin had grown used to. This was the silence of recognition, of children who'd believed they were alone in their grief, suddenly discovering they weren't. "Did you want to die too?" Jaewon asked. The question was too adult, too knowing, and it sent a chill down Tae-jin's spine because it revealed exactly how dark his son's thoughts had become.
"Yes," Adana said simply. No sugarcoating, no gentle lies, just truth. For a long time, I wanted to follow her, but then I realized something. Chisom wouldn't want me to stop living just because she had to. She'd want me to keep loving people, keep helping, keep being present in the world, even when it hurt. "Do you think our mom will come back?" This from Hyunwoo, the quietest one, the boy who hid under beds and watched the world from shadows. Adana looked at Tae-jin, and in that moment he saw her clearly. This wasn't just a housekeeper. This was a woman who'd walked through fire and learned how to speak its language. This was someone who understood that healing required honesty, that children could handle truth better than they could handle lies dressed up as protection. "I don't know," Adana said, "but I know this. Whether she comes back or not, you deserve to be loved. You deserve to have people who stay, and you deserve to believe that you didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes people leave because they're broken, not because you broke them." Seijin, the 5-year-old who'd forgotten how to use words, climbed off his chair and walked to Adana. He crawled into her lap without asking permission, without speaking, just seeking the simple comfort of being held. And she held him, her arms wrapping around his small body, her hand stroking his hair, while his brothers watched with something like hunger in their eyes. That's when Tae-jin understood what she'd done. She hadn't fixed his sons. She'd simply shown them that their brokenness didn't make them unlovable, that their pain didn't disqualify them from tenderness, that someone could witness the worst of them and choose to stay anyway. The weeks that followed weren't easy. Healing never is. But slowly, incrementally, like spring melting winter's ice, change began. Minjun started drawing again, but the images shifted. Where once he'd drawn monsters and fires, he began sketching people, a woman who looked like Adana, surrounded by 4 small figures. He didn't show anyone these drawings, but Tae-jin found them sometimes, tucked into books or hidden under couch cushions, evidence of a heart beginning to thaw.
Jaewon asked questions, hundreds of them. Why did people die? Where did his mother go? Was God real? Did love last? Questions that had no easy answers. Questions that required Adana to sit with him in uncertainty, rather than offering false comfort. And somehow, her willingness to say, "I don't know," was more reassuring than any confident lie could have been. Hyunwoo emerged from hiding, first for 10 minutes at a time, then 20, then whole hours. His first full sentence in 8 months came on a Wednesday afternoon. "Miss Adana, will you stay?" She'd knelt to his level, looked him straight in the eyes and said, "I'm not going anywhere." And Soyeon began to speak, real words, real sentences. The screaming didn't stop completely. Trauma doesn't evaporate overnight, but it reduced, replaced gradually by language, by the ability to name his feelings rather than just expel them as noise. His first full sentence was, "I love you, Miss Adana," and Tae-jin, overhearing it from his home office, had broken down crying alone, his shoulders shaking with the force of emotions he'd kept locked away for 3 years. Late one night, 6 weeks after Adana's arrival, she brought Tae-jin tea in his home office. He looked up from his laptop, surprised. It was past midnight. She should have been asleep. "You don't have to do that, bringing me tea. That's not part of your job." "I know," Adana replied, "but I notice things. You don't sleep. You work until your eyes can't focus. You're running from something." "I'm not running. I'm providing. I'm hiding," she finished gently. "You're hiding from your sons because you're afraid of failing them again." The words should have made him angry. Instead, they cracked something open in his chest. "Sun-hee, my wife, she said I was emotionally absent. Maybe she was right. Maybe I'm the reason she left. Maybe if I'd been different, better, more present." "Stop." Adana's voice was quiet but firm. "You can't carry that. Your wife left because she was drowning, not because you pushed her under. And your sons are suffering, not because you're a bad father, but because you're a grieving one who never learned how to grieve out loud." Tajin looked at her, really looked, and felt something shift. This woman, this stranger who'd walked into his disaster of a life with no credentials and no promises, had seen him. Not the CEO, not the billionaire, not the composed mask he wore for the world, but the terrified, broken man underneath. "I don't know how to be their father anymore," he admitted. "Then learn to be their father again. Start small. Tomorrow, eat breakfast with them. Not just once, every day. Show up. Be present. That's all they need. They don't need perfect. They need there." The next morning, Tajin sat at the breakfast table. The boys were suspicious at first, waiting for the other shoe to drop, for this to be revealed as temporary, performative, another false promise from an adult they couldn't trust. "Why are you here?" Minjun asked, his tone accusatory. "I wanted to eat with my sons," Tajin said. "You don't eat with us. You eat money and phone calls." Adana started to intervene, but Tajin held up a hand. "He's right. I'm sorry." Minjun's fork clattered against his plate. "Don't say sorry if you don't mean it." And Tajin, this man who commanded boardrooms and negotiated billion-dollar deals, who'd built an empire on confidence and control, felt tears forming in his eyes. "I mean it. I'm so sorry." Sejun, the youngest, the most wounded, the child who'd forgotten how to trust anyone, slid off Adana's lap and walked to his father. He placed one small hand on Tajin's arm, and that simple touch, 5 small fingers against expensive fabric, contained more grace than Tajin had ever deserved. If you're still with me, you understand that this story isn't about a housekeeper saving a family. It's about wounded people learning to be present for each other's pain. Comment below if you've ever felt like the Yoon family, broken beyond repair, and discovered that healing was possible anyway. Then came Mother's Day.
Korea's Parents' Day, Aboinal, fell on May 8th. The school sent home an assignment, draw your family. Innocent enough, except when your family is built on absence and grief. Minjun drew carefully, precisely. He drew Adana in the center of the page, labeled her Mom in careful Hangul, and then took a black crayon and scribbled violently over the space where Sun-hee's face would have been. He didn't show anyone, but the teacher, concerned, called Tae-jin. "We need to discuss this. The drawing is troubling. I think Minjun is struggling with some complicated emotions about maternal figures." Tae-jin picked up his sons early that day. They were silent in the car, dangerous in their quiet, and he knew, in the way parents know things without being told, that something was coming. Some storm was building, and all he could do was wait for it to break. They came home to find Adana humming in the kitchen, that same Igbo melody that had become the soundtrack of their healing. She smiled at them, unaware that she was standing in a minefield, that beneath the surface of their fragile peace, old wounds were tearing open. It started with Minjun finding an old card, a Mother's Day card Sun-hee had made years ago, before everything fell apart, when she was still trying to convince herself she could be the mother they needed. It was hidden in a drawer of unused kitchen items, a relic from a different life, and Minjun found it by accident while looking for scissors. The card was simple, handmade. "To my 4 miracles," it said in Sunhee's elegant handwriting. "You make every day Mother's Day. Love always, Mom." Love always. The lie on the page was unbearable. Minjun's face twisted, and something in him snapped. Not broke. It had already been broken. This was something worse. This was calcification, the moment when pain hardens into rage, so complete it consumes everything.
He screamed, a wordless sound that brought his brothers running. And then, as if they'd all been waiting for permission to fall apart, they destroyed Adana's room. Ripped her clothes, smashed Chisam's photo frame, the glass shattering across the floor. Poured paint left over from an art project across her Bible, the pages bleeding color. Jaewon was screaming, "You're not our mom! Stop pretending! Stop acting like you care when you're just gonna leave too!" Minjun threw things, his voice raw. "Our real mom left because we're broken, because we're too much, and you'll leave too. Everyone leaves." Hyun-woo had crawled back under the bed, regressing instantly to his hiding, his small body shaking. And Surgeon was screaming again, that same wordless sound, all the progress of 6 weeks evaporating in minutes, his voice hoarse and desperate and utterly devastating. This was the moment that had broken 26 caregivers. This was the test that proved, inevitably, that the boys were right, that they were too damaged, too difficult, too much for anyone to handle. This was the moment when rational adults made rational choices and left. Adana stood in the doorway of her destroyed room and felt something crack in her chest. She looked at her daughter's photo, the glass scattered like tears. She looked at her Bible, the pages ruined, years of notes and prayers now illegible. She looked at these 4 small boys, these children who'd been hurt so badly they'd learned to hurt first, hurt preventatively, hurt as protection. And she sat down. Right there, in the middle of the destruction, surrounded by the evidence of their rage and her loss, she sat down on the floor and began to sing. Chukwu Oma, Chukwu Oma, Chukwu Oma di Ebube. But her voice broke this time, tears streaming down her face, because this hurt. It hurt to be tested like this. It hurt to offer love and receive violence. It hurt to lose her daughter's photo again, to have that wound reopened just when it was beginning to scar. But she kept singing anyway, through tears, through pain, because that's what faith was. Not the absence of hurt, but the choice to keep loving even when love cost everything.
The boys stopped. They'd expected anger, expected her to yell, to leave, to prove that they were right about themselves, about the world, about the impossibility of being loved. Instead, she was crying. The invincible Miss Adana, who'd weathered every test with calm competence, was breaking in front of them. But she was breaking differently than they expected. She wasn't breaking away. She was breaking open. "You're right," she said, her voice thick. "I'm not your mom. I can't replace her. I'll never be her." Minjun's face crumpled. "Then why are you here?" Adana opened her arms. "Because even broken things deserve to be loved." The silence that followed felt like the whole world holding its breath. Then Seiyujin moved. He crawled to her, his small body shaking, and buried his face in her shoulder. He was sobbing now, not screaming, actual tears and actual words. "I miss her. I miss her so much, but I hate her. I hate her for leaving. I hate her for not loving us enough to stay." Hyun-woo emerged from under the bed and joined them, his voice tiny. "Was it my fault? Did I make her sick?" Jaewon was next, his intellectual rage dissolving into raw grief. "I miss her. I hate her. I miss her. How can I miss someone and hate them at the same time?"
And Min Jun, the oldest, the one who'd held it together longest, who'd tried to protect his brothers by being hard enough for all of them, finally collapsed. We weren't enough. We broke her. We break everything. Adana held them all, 4 crying boys and 1 crying woman, all of them wounded, all of them grieving, all of them finally allowing themselves to feel it instead of fight it. No, baby. No, you didn't break anyone. You were never broken, never. That's when Yoon Tae-jin came home. He stood in the doorway staring at the destruction, at his sons and this woman all tangled together on the floor in a puddle of tears and paint and shattered glass. And something in him finally understood. This was the climax, not of disaster, but of healing. This was the moment when grief, held in for 3 years, finally found release. This was the moment when his family stopped pretending they were fine and admitted they were shattered.
Min Jun looked up, saw his father, and asked the question that had been burning in him since he was 4 years old. "Dad, why didn't Mom love us?" Tae-jin knelt. For the first time in 3 years, he knelt on the floor with his sons and let himself cry in front of them. "She did love you. She loved you so much it scared her. But she was sick in a way that had nothing to do with you. She couldn't carry her pain and love you at the same time, and her pain won. It was never your fault." They sat there together for an hour, maybe more. No one fixed anything. No one offered solutions. They just sat in the mess, in the grief, in the truth that sometimes love isn't enough to keep people from leaving, but it's enough to help the ones left behind survive. Sejun's small voice finally broke the silence. "Can Miss Adana be our mom now?" Taejun and Adana's eyes met across 4 small heads, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them. Not romance, not yet, but recognition. The acknowledgement that they were building something here, something that looked like family, even if it didn't fit any traditional definition, something that was theirs. 6 months later, the Yoon household was unrecognizable. Not perfect. Healing isn't linear, and trauma doesn't disappear just because you acknowledge it. But different. Fundamentally, impossibly different. Min Jun, now 8, had started teaching Sejun to read Korean. He was patient, protective, but in a healthy way now, no longer trying to be a shield, but learning to be a brother. His drawings had changed completely. His latest, pinned to the refrigerator, showed a family of 6, 4 boys, 1 woman, and 1 man, all holding hands. Jae-won wrote poetry, beautiful, heartbreaking poetry that his teacher submitted to a children's literary magazine without telling him. It won 3rd place. The poem was titled Ode to Miss Adana Who Stayed, and Tae-jin had cried reading it. He'd cried a lot in the past 6 months. He was learning that tears weren't weakness. They were just water, washing away the debris so new things could grow.
Hyunwoo no longer hid. He spoke in full sentences. He laughed, actually laughed, loud and sudden, the kind of laughter that made everyone else laugh too, just from the pure joy of it. And Sejun sang, constantly, a strange mix of Korean children's songs and Igbo worship melodies, his small voice carrying through the penthouse at all hours, filling spaces that had been silent for years with sound that was life itself. Tae-jin had changed too. He left work at 5 p.m. now, no exceptions. Family dinner was non-negotiable. He'd started therapy, real therapy, not just reading parenting books, and was learning to name his feelings instead of burying them under work and whiskey. He'd removed his wedding ring, not because he'd stopped loving Soon-hee, but because he'd finally accepted that love wasn't enough to bring her back, and holding on to her ghost was preventing him from being present for the life he actually had. On a Saturday afternoon in November, Tae-jin took his family to the Han River for a picnic. He'd planned it carefully, with help from the boys who knew something their father didn't yet, that love, when it's real, requires asking. After they ate,
After the boys had chased each other along the riverside, shrieking with laughter, Tae-jin gathered them together. They each held a drawing they'd made, their best work, prepared over weeks in secret. Min-jun went first, showing Adana his picture, a woman surrounded by hearts. "Will you be our mom?" Jaewon next, a poem written in careful Hangul. "Forever?" Hyunwoo held up his drawing of a house with stick figures in every window. "Please?" And Sejun, the baby, just climbed into her lap and whispered, "Mama Adana, stay?" Taejun knelt in front of her, and for a moment he was just a man, stripped of wealth and status and everything except vulnerability. "Adana Okafor, you came to us as a housekeeper. You stayed as a miracle. You healed wounds I couldn't see and loved sons I'd failed. I'm not asking you to fill a space soon he left. I'm asking you to build something new with us. Will you marry me? Will you be the mother these boys chose?" Adana looked at 4 hopeful faces, looked at this man who'd learned to be present, to cry, to ask for what he needed instead of pretending he needed nothing. She touched Chisom's bracelet, still on her wrist after all these months, and felt her daughter's presence like a blessing. "Chisom would have loved you all," she whispered. Yes, I'll stay forever." 1 year later, in a photography studio overlooking Namsam Tower, 7 people gathered for a family portrait. Min-jun, 9 now, stood tall beside his brothers. Jaewon, 8, had his arm around Hyunwoo, 7, who was smiling broadly. Seo-jun, 6, held his father's hand. Tae-jin wore a hanbok, traditional and elegant. Adana wore a dress that was part Nigerian, part Korean, fabric from both worlds sewn together into something entirely new. And in her arms, sleeping peacefully, was a baby girl, Chisom-hee, named for the daughter Adana had lost and the mother the boys had lost, a bridge between grief and hope, a testament to the truth that endings can become beginnings if you're brave enough to keep living. The photographer counted down. 3, 2, 1. 7 faces turned toward the camera. 7 people who'd been broken in different ways, who'd found each other in the wreckage, who'd chosen to build something beautiful from the fragments. The flash went off, capturing this moment, this family, this impossible, miraculous, chosen thing they'd become. That night, after the boys were asleep, Tae-jin and Adana stood on the balcony, baby Chisom-hee sleeping between them in a bassinet. Through the windows, they could see the boys' room, Min-jun reading to his brothers, all 4 of them piled in one bed, even though they each had their own, choosing proximity over space, choosing together over alone. "Thank you for not leaving," Tae-jin said quietly. Adana leaned her head on his shoulder. "Thank you for letting me stay."
And in that moment, in the city lights of Seoul, in a penthouse that had once held nothing but broken glass and broken hearts, a family that had been shattered learned the most important lesson of all, that wholeness doesn't mean unbroken. It means broken pieces choosing every single day to hold each other up. Family isn't who you start with, it's who you choose to stay for. And sometimes, the people who need us most are the ones we find when we're brave enough to walk toward chaos instead of away from it, to sit in the pain instead of fleeing it, to sing in the darkness until the light finds its way home. Thank you for being here until the end. Subscribe and like this video for more stories like this. God bless you.
K Afro Tales. The weak will become strong one day.